Still no husband, Claire? Jason Miller's laugh carried farther than it should have, and before the night was over, he would learn that humiliating the woman he once abandoned was the worst mistake he had ever made. Claire Bennett froze beside a table glittering with crystal glasses, her silver serving tray balanced carefully against one palm. Around her, the Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom shimmered beneath chandeliers bright enough to make midnight look like noon. Nearly 400 guests filled the annual Blackwood Foundation Gala. People whose watches cost more than Claire earned in a year, yet somehow Jason's voice cut through every conversation she wanted to hide inside. Wow, he continued, looking at her plain black uniform before glancing toward the elegant woman holding his arm. I figured somebody would have rescued you by now. A few people nearby laughed politely. Claire felt heat rise beneath her fair skin, but she kept her expression calm. 3 years ago, Jason had walked out of their tiny apartment after telling her that love did not pay bills and ambition did not wear a waitress uniform. Apparently, success had not made him kinder. Good to see you too, Jason, Claire said. Nothing more. No anger. No explanation. She simply reached for an empty champagne glass and placed it on her tray. That seemed to bother him more than tears would have. You're seriously still doing this? He asked. Serving people? Claire looked directly at him. It pays my rent. His smile widened. Always practical. 30 feet away, a man in a perfectly tailored black suit slowly lowered the untouched glass in his hand. His name was Alexander Graves, though only a handful of humans in the ballroom understood what that name truly meant. To Wall Street, he was the reclusive chairman of Graves International. To the pale, unnaturally still guests gathered around his table, he was something considerably older. King. Alexander had ignored politicians, billionaires, and vampire nobles all evening, but the instant he heard Claire's voice, his attention sharpened. He knew that voice. He remembered rain striking an empty sidewalk 6 months earlier. A stalled black car. A stranger who had offered him her umbrella while she stood getting soaked herself. She had never asked his name, never recognized his face. She had simply smiled and said, "Nobody should stand alone in weather like this." Alexander had spent centuries surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Claire Bennett had wanted nothing. And now she was here. Jason leaned closer, still smiling. I guess some people just never move forward. Claire tightened her fingers around the tray. And some people confuse moving forward with looking down on everyone behind them. The laughter stopped. Jason's expression changed. Across the ballroom, Alexander rose from his chair. Every vampire at his table immediately fell silent. Claire did not notice. Jason did. His face lost a little color as the pale stranger began walking directly toward them. Alexander crossed the ballroom without hurry, yet the room seemed to rearrange itself around him. Conversations softened. Shoulders straightened. Several guests stepped aside before he reached them, as though some instinct warned them not to stand in his path. Claire noticed the change before she noticed him. Jason did too. His confident smile weakened as Alexander stopped only a few feet away. Up close, he was exactly as Claire remembered from that rainy night 6 months earlier. Tall, composed, black hair swept neatly back, and skin so pale beneath the chandelier light that it seemed carved from winter marble. Only his eyes were different. She remembered them tired. Tonight they were cold gray, focused entirely on her. You, Claire whispered. Alexander's expression softened by the smallest degree. You remember me. Jason glanced between them. You two know each other? Claire ignored him. Your car broke down. It did. You never returned my umbrella. For one strange second, silence surrounded them. Then something almost resembling amusement touched Alexander's eyes. I have it. Claire blinked. You kept a $12 umbrella for 6 months? It was given to me. I loaned it to you. Then I have apparently been in your debt for 6 months. Jason laughed, but the sound came out uncertain. Claire, are you going to introduce us? Alexander finally looked at him, and whatever warmth had briefly appeared disappeared. Alexander Graves. Jason's face changed instantly. Everyone in New York finance knew that name. Graves International owned companies across banking, technology, shipping, and real estate, although almost nobody seemed to know precisely how large the empire was. Mr. Graves, Jason said quickly, extending his hand. Jason Miller. Miller Strategic Holdings. Alexander looked at the offered hand, then back at Jason. I heard what you said to her. Jason slowly lowered his arm. That was just a joke between old friends. We are not friends, Claire said. Jason gave her a warning look. Alexander saw it. His jaw tightened. Then perhaps the joke was only amusing to you. Jason glanced toward the surrounding guests and forced another smile. Look, Claire and I have history. I was only surprised she is still here, still working tables, still single. Claire's stomach sank when nearby faces turned toward her again. Jason noticed and pressed harder. 3 years, Claire. You always said you wanted a family someday. What happened? Claire opened her mouth, but Alexander moved first. He stepped beside her, close enough that his presence became a wall between her and the watching room. That is enough. His voice was quiet. It did not need volume. Claire looked up at him. Something about the ballroom had changed again. The pale guests near Alexander's table were no longer pretending not to watch. They were perfectly still, waiting. Jason swallowed. I did not mean any disrespect to you, Mr. Graves. You were not disrespecting me. Alexander's gaze sharpened. You were disrespecting her. Jason stared at Claire, confusion replacing arrogance. Why do you care? Alexander was silent for one heartbeat. Then another. Claire expected him to mention the umbrella. Perhaps gratitude. Instead, his hand settled gently behind her shoulder, protective without forcing her closer. His next words were calm enough to sound almost ordinary. Because she is my wife. The ballroom went completely silent. Claire forgot how to breathe. For several seconds, the only sound she could hear was the faint music from the orchestra and the soft clink of a glass being set down somewhere across the ballroom. Jason stared at Alexander as if he had spoken in another language. Then he laughed. Your wife? He repeated. Claire Bennett. Claire turned sharply toward Alexander. What are you doing? She whispered. Alexander did not answer. His attention remained on Jason, whose confidence was beginning to return. That is impossible, Jason said. I saw her 6 months ago. She was single. A great deal can happen in 6 months, Alexander replied. Jason looked around, searching the faces nearby for someone willing to share his disbelief. Instead, he found something stranger. The pale guests surrounding the central tables had risen from their seats. One by one, quietly, deliberately. An elderly man in a charcoal suit placed one hand over his heart and bowed his head toward Alexander. A silver-haired woman followed. Then another guest. Then 20 more. Within seconds, nearly every vampire in the ballroom was standing. Claire felt the temperature around her seem to fall. Jason noticed too. What is this? He murmured. Alexander finally turned toward Claire. There is something I should have told you when we met. You think? Her voice came out sharper than she intended. His gray eyes held hers. Alexander Graves is the name I use in your world. Claire stared at him. My world. Before he could explain, the elderly man approached and stopped several feet away. He bowed deeply. Your Majesty. Claire's fingers loosened around the serving tray. Alexander caught it before it slipped, setting it carefully on the nearest table. Your Majesty? Jason echoed. Nobody laughed this time. The silver-haired woman lowered her head. The king has spoken. His declaration has been witnessed. A murmur traveled through the room. Claire looked from her to Alexander. King of what? Alexander's expression became strangely guarded. My people. Claire glanced at the motionless guests, their unnaturally pale faces, their eyes reflecting the chandelier light in shades no human eyes should possess. Memories rushed back. Rumors about the Grand Meridian. Wealthy guests who never touched dinner. People who seemed unchanged in photographs taken decades apart. Claire's heartbeat quickened. Vampires, she whispered. Alexander gave a single nod. Jason took a step backward. This is some kind of performance. It is not, said the elderly man. You are standing before Alexander Graves, sovereign of the North American vampire houses. Jason's face drained of color. Claire should have been afraid. Instead, anger arrived first. She turned to Alexander. You cannot just announce that I am your wife because somebody embarrassed me. I know. Then fix it. For the first time that evening, uncertainty crossed the vampire king's face. The silver-haired woman spoke before he could respond. I am afraid it may no longer be that simple. Alexander went completely still. Lady Evelyn. The warning in his voice was unmistakable. She continued anyway. A royal declaration made publicly before the assembled houses carries authority under the Old Covenant. Claire slowly looked at Alexander. What does that mean? His silence frightened her more than the word vampire had. Alexander. He lowered his voice. It means I intended to protect your dignity with a lie. His eyes moved toward the hundreds of witnesses surrounding them. But according to our oldest law, I may have just made it true. Claire stared at Alexander as the meaning of his words settled over her. You may have made it true? She asked. Her voice was quiet, but Alexander heard the anger beneath it. I did not know the covenant would recognize the declaration, he said. That law has not been invoked in more than 2 centuries. That is supposed to make me feel better? No, his answer came immediately. It is supposed to tell you that I did not plan this. Lady Evelyn approached with measured steps, her silver gown catching the chandelier light. There may be a way to challenge the claim, Your Majesty, but not here. Alexander's eyes narrowed. Explain. The royal archives contain the original covenant. Until we examine it, no one should assume the bond is complete. Claire folded her arms. Bond. Before Lady Evelyn could answer, a strange warmth moved across Claire's left wrist. She looked down. At first there was nothing. Then a thin golden line appeared beneath her fair skin, faint as reflected candlelight. Claire rubbed it with her thumb. The line remained. Another curved beside it. Alexander stopped breathing. Lady Evelyn's composed expression vanished. Impossible. Jason, still several feet away, leaned forward. What is that? Alexander gently reached toward Claire, then stopped before touching her. May I? The question surprised everyone. Claire hesitated, then extended her hand. His pale fingers closed lightly around her wrist. The instant they touched, the golden lines brightened. A delicate symbol formed beneath her skin, shaped like a crescent surrounding a small star. A collective whisper moved through the vampire guests. Alexander released her immediately. For the first time since Claire had met him, the ancient king looked genuinely shaken. That is not the royal marriage seal, Lady Evelyn whispered. Then what is it? Claire demanded. Lady Evelyn looked at Alexander. He answered slowly. A recognition mark. Recognition of what? I do not know yet. Claire gave a short, disbelieving laugh. Wonderful. Tonight I came here worried about making rent, and now a vampire king accidentally married me, and nobody knows why my wrist is glowing. Despite the tension, Alexander almost smiled. Almost. Your summary is unfortunately accurate. Claire looked toward Jason. His humiliation had disappeared. He was watching her wrist now, with a calculating expression she remembered too well. Alexander noticed. Mr. Miller, he said. Jason straightened. You will forget what you saw here tonight. I thought humans deserved free will. Jason's answer came too quickly. Alexander's gaze sharpened. Claire noticed that too. Jason knew more than he should. How do you know our laws? Alexander asked. Silence. Jason glanced toward the ballroom exit. Lucky guess. No, Alexander said softly. It was not. Claire felt the atmosphere change. Jason forced a smile and stepped backward. This has been entertaining, but I should leave. Alexander did not stop him. That frightened Claire more than if he had. Jason disappeared through the ballroom doors, already reaching for his phone. Alexander turned to Lady Evelyn. Have someone watch him. Then he looked at Claire. We need to go. Where? My estate. The original covenant is kept there. Claire shook her head. I am not going anywhere until you explain what is happening. Alexander studied the glowing symbol on her wrist. 6 months ago, you gave an umbrella to a stranger in the rain. His voice lowered. Claire, I think something recognized you that night. She looked down as the mark pulsed once with warm golden light. Alexander's face became pale, even by vampire standards. And I think it has been waiting for me to find you ever since. 20 minutes later, Claire sat inside the quietest car she had ever seen, watching Manhattan slide past tinted windows while Alexander sat across from her. The city looked normal outside. Yellow taxis, late-night diners, people hurrying beneath glowing signs. Claire found that almost insulting. Her entire understanding of reality had changed before dessert, yet New York continued as though nothing had happened. She looked at the golden mark on her wrist. It had faded, but not disappeared. Start with the umbrella, she said. Alexander glanced up. What about it? You said something recognized me that night. I said I think it did. That distinction is not helping. Lady Evelyn sat beside Alexander, studying an old leather-bound book she had retrieved before leaving the hotel. Recognition marks predate the modern vampire houses, she explained. Most exist only in historical records. Claire looked at her. And what did they recognize? Evelyn hesitated. Bloodlines. Claire stared. I am a waitress from Queens. Those facts are not mutually exclusive, Alexander said. Claire gave him a flat look. You have had centuries to practice being mysterious. I have had 20 minutes. Please speak normally. Something softened in his expression. Fair enough. He leaned forward. Certain human families once served as mediators between my kind and yours. They could enter protected vampire places, activate ancient seals, and recognize magic ordinary humans could not perceive. Most of those families disappeared generations ago. Claire remembered her grandmother keeping boxes of old letters nobody was allowed to throw away. Strange family stories Claire had dismissed as folklore. My mother was an elementary school teacher, she said. My grandmother ran a bakery. History often survives by becoming ordinary, Evelyn replied. The car turned away from the crowded avenues and headed north. Claire checked the time. Nearly midnight. Where exactly is this estate? Westchester County, Alexander said. About 30 miles from Manhattan. Claire looked at her uniform. I am going to a Vampire King's estate dressed for a catering shift. You look perfectly respectable. That might be the strangest reassuring thing anyone has ever said to me. Alexander almost smiled again. His phone vibrated. He read the message, and the warmth vanished from his face. What? Claire asked. He showed Evelyn the screen. Her eyes hardened. Jason. Claire's stomach tightened. What did he do? Alexander lowered the phone. He contacted someone 11 minutes after leaving the gala. Who? Councilman Victor Hale. Evelyn closed the book. Hale has opposed Alexander's attempts to strengthen protections for humans for decades. Claire looked between them. Why would Jason know a vampire councilman? Nobody answered immediately. That silence was answer enough. Jason's appearance tonight had not been coincidence. Claire thought of his questions, his sudden interest in whether she had married, and the way he had recognized a vampire principle he should never have known. He came there looking for something, she whispered. Alexander nodded. Possibly someone. The car slowed before enormous iron gates set into a stone wall. Beyond them stood a mansion of dark stone and warm windows, surrounded by acres of moonlit trees. The gates opened without anyone touching them. Claire's wrist suddenly burned warm. Golden light returned beneath her skin. Evelyn inhaled sharply. Alexander. He was already staring through the windshield. At the far end of the driveway stood two ancient stone pillars. Symbols carved into them had begun glowing with the same golden light as Claire's mark. The car stopped. Alexander stepped out first, then offered Claire his hand. She stared at it for a moment before accepting. The instant her shoes touched the driveway, every light inside the centuries-old estate came on at once. Evelyn went completely still. That has not happened since 1847. Claire looked toward Alexander. What happened in 1847? His pale face revealed something she had not seen before. Not fear. Recognition. The last woman carrying your mark entered this house. Claire kept her hand in Alexander's as they stood beneath the glowing stone pillars. Although she was no longer certain whether she was holding on for reassurance or simply because letting go felt strangely wrong. Who was she? Claire asked. Alexander looked toward the mansion. Her name was Eleanor Bennett. Claire stopped. Bennett. Lady Evelyn's eyes widened. You recognize the name? It was my grandmother's grandmother's name. At least, I think it was. My grandmother used to mention an Eleanor whenever she talked about our family history. Alexander turned slowly toward her. Did she ever tell you anything else? Claire searched her memory. Only stories. Eleanor traveled constantly. She kept journals. My grandmother said she could walk into places where locked doors opened for her. Evelyn exchanged a glance with Alexander. That was not a metaphor. The massive front doors opened before they reached them. Claire stared into a marble entrance hall illuminated by dozens of warm lamps. No servant stood nearby. Nobody had touched the doors. I am starting to miss normal doorknobs, she murmured. Alexander led them inside. The estate felt less like a mansion than a piece of another century preserved beneath glass. Dark wood, tall windows, oil paintings, a sweeping staircase rising toward shadowed balconies. Yet nothing felt abandoned. The house seemed awake, watching, waiting. Claire's golden mark pulsed once. Somewhere deeper inside, something clicked. Evelyn turned toward the sound. The archive. They followed a long corridor until they reached a circular door made of black wood, its surface covered with faded symbols. Alexander placed his palm against it. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. That door answers only to the reigning monarch, Evelyn said quietly. Alexander's expression hardened. It always has. Claire stepped closer. The mark on her wrist grew warm. Maybe tonight it changed the rules. She raised her hand before Alexander could stop her. Her fingertips barely touched the wood. Golden light raced through every carved symbol. The door opened. Nobody spoke. Inside, shelves climbed nearly 20 feet toward a domed ceiling, filled with books, scrolls, sealed boxes, and documents older than the United States. At the center stood a stone table. One book rested upon it. Already open. Evelyn approached carefully. The Old Covenant. Alexander looked at Claire. It was sealed when I last entered this room. Claire moved beside Evelyn. The page contained lines written in an unfamiliar script, yet the moment Claire looked at them, meaning formed inside her mind. The sovereign may declare a royal companion before witnesses, she read slowly. But no crown may command the human heart. Alexander's gaze sharpened. Claire continued. The claim remains incomplete unless freely accepted. Relief moved across her face. So, I am not actually married to you. No, Alexander said, and something unexpectedly complicated passed through his eyes. You are free. Claire smiled faintly. Good. The golden mark suddenly brightened. Pages began turning by themselves until they stopped near the back of the book. Evelyn leaned closer, then went pale. That cannot be. Beneath the ancient writing was an illustration of the exact symbol glowing on Claire's wrist. Alexander read the inscription silently. His expression changed. Claire looked at him. What does it say? He hesitated. The royal declaration did not create your mark. Then what did? Alexander looked directly into her eyes. Your bloodline did. Evelyn traced the faded words beneath the symbol without touching the page. The House of Bennett was not merely allied with vampire royalty. Claire's heartbeat quickened. What was it? Evelyn looked up. It was the human bloodline entrusted with choosing whether a vampire king was worthy to remain king. Claire stared at the ancient page until the words seemed to lose their meaning. Choosing whether you remain king? She asked. Alexander did not move. That authority was believed extinct. Apparently my family missed the announcement. Lady Evelyn turned several pages with careful fingers. The Bennett line served as the human counterweight to royal power. When a new sovereign was recognized, a Bennett could confirm the crown or reject its bearer. Claire looked at Alexander. And if I reject you? His answer came without hesitation. Then I surrender the crown. Evelyn looked sharply at him. Alexander, the council would challenge that interpretation. They may challenge whatever they wish. His gray eyes remained on Claire. She will not be pressured into choosing me. Claire felt something inside her shift. This was the same man who had controlled an entire ballroom with a sentence. Yet now, when ancient law apparently placed his kingdom in her hands, he refused to demand anything. Before Claire could answer, Evelyn's phone vibrated. She read the message and went still. Victor Hale has called an emergency council session for tomorrow night. Alexander's expression cooled. On what grounds? He claims an unidentified human has activated a dormant royal mark and may represent a threat to succession. Claire exhaled. Jason works fast. Evelyn looked at her. There is more. Hale submitted photographs from tonight. Photographs of what? Your wrist. Claire's stomach dropped. She remembered Jason reaching for his phone before leaving the ballroom. Alexander's voice became very quiet. He knew what he was looking for. Evelyn nodded. Which means someone prepared him. Claire walked away from the table, trying to think. 3 years ago, Jason had complained about her family stories. 6 months ago, he had suddenly contacted her again, asking casual questions about her grandmother's belongings. Claire had assumed nostalgia had made him curious. Now every conversation felt different. He asked about Eleanor, she said. Alexander turned. When? Months ago. He wanted to know whether my grandmother left me journals or jewelry. Evelyn closed the covenant. Then Jason did not reconnect with you by accident. Claire felt foolish for ever believing otherwise, but Alexander seemed to read the thought before she spoke it. Trusting someone once does not make his deception your failure. Claire looked at him. No pity. No judgment. Just certainty. A chime echoed through the archive. Alexander glanced toward a small brass panel beside the door. Someone is at the outer gate. Evelyn checked her phone again. No arrival was scheduled. A moment later, a voice came through the estate intercom. Your Majesty, Councilman Hale requests immediate entrance. Alexander's face became unreadable. At midnight, Claire asked, "Vampires rarely care about convenient hours." Despite everything, she nearly smiled. Then another voice came faintly through the speaker. "Human. Familiar. Jason." Claire's expression hardened. Alexander noticed. "You do not have to see him." She looked down at the mark glowing softly on her wrist. Hours ago, she had been carrying champagne while Jason laughed at her life. Now he was standing outside a Vampire King's estate because something in her blood frightened powerful people. "No," Claire said. "I think I do." They returned to the entrance hall as the front doors opened. Victor Hale entered first, elegant and pale, followed by Jason, whose confidence had returned. Hale gave Alexander a formal bow, then looked directly at Claire. "So Eleanor Bennett's heir has finally appeared." Claire felt Alexander become perfectly still beside her. "You knew Eleanor?" she asked. Hale smiled faintly. "My dear, everyone remembers Eleanor." His gaze dropped to Claire's glowing wrist. "Especially the king who lost his crown because of her." Claire turned toward Alexander. He said nothing. Hale's smile widened. "Did he forget to tell you that part?" Claire looked from Victor Hale to Alexander. "What does he mean?" Alexander remained silent for a moment, his pale face unreadable beneath the warm entrance hall lights. Then he turned toward her. "Eleanor Bennett did remove a king." Hale smiled. "There. The truth finally arrives." "Let him finish," Claire said. Hale's smile faded. Alexander continued. "In 1847, my uncle Marcus held the crown. Eleanor was summoned to confirm his rule. She refused." Claire glanced toward the glowing mark on her wrist. "Why?" "Because he believed humans existed beneath vampire law rather than beside it." Alexander's voice remained calm. "Eleanor believed power without accountability eventually becomes cruelty." Hale stepped forward, and her decision divided the houses for decades. "Her decision prevented them from becoming something worse," Alexander replied. Claire studied him. "How did you become king?" "Eleanor chose me." The room went silent. Even Jason looked surprised. Alexander met Claire's eyes. "I was younger then. I disagreed with her often. She trusted me anyway, but only after I accepted limits on royal authority and protections for humans." Claire slowly understood. "So my ancestor did not take your crown?" "No. She gave me the responsibility of carrying it." Hill's expression tightened. "A romantic interpretation of history." "An accurate one," Lady Evelyn said. Jason shifted impatiently. "This does not change what happened tonight." Claire suddenly appears, activates some ancient mark, and now she can decide who rules. Claire turned toward him. "You knew about my family before tonight." Jason hesitated. "I knew stories." "You asked about Eleanor's journals." "Because Hale told me they might be valuable." Claire felt the last pieces settle into place. "That is why you contacted me again." Jason said nothing. His silence answered for him. Alexander stepped closer to Claire, but he did not speak for her. He simply stood beside her. Hale looked at the golden mark. "Tomorrow the council will require Claire to determine whether Alexander remains sovereign." "No," Alexander said. "She has learned about this world tonight. You will not force a decision from her tomorrow. The covenant requires judgment once the mark awakens. Then the council may judge me without her." Hale stared at him. "You would risk your crown for a human waitress you barely know?" Alexander's expression did not change. "I would risk it to preserve her right to choose." Claire looked at him. Something quiet moved through her chest. Not romance. Not yet. Trust. Small, fragile, unexpected trust. Hale gave a cold smile. "Then perhaps you are no longer suited to rule." "Perhaps," Alexander replied. "That is not yours to decide." Claire stepped forward. Every eye turned toward her. Hours earlier, Jason's laughter had made her want to disappear. Now she stood in a house filled with ancient power and felt strangely steady. "I will attend the council tomorrow." Alexander immediately looked at her. "Claire, you do not owe them anything." "I know." She looked at Hale. "That is exactly why I am going." Hale's confidence flickered. Claire continued. "But I will not choose anyone because you pressure me, because Alexander protects me, or because some old book says my last name matters." The mark on her wrist suddenly flared gold. The symbols carved above the entrance doors answered with the same light. Evelyn whispered. The covenant heard her. Hale stared at Claire as though seeing her for the first time. Jason took a nervous step back. Claire looked down at her wrist, then at Alexander. "Tomorrow I decide what kind of king you are." Alexander bowed his head. "Not as a billionaire, not as a vampire, but as a ruler accepting judgment. Then tomorrow, he said softly, I will answer every question you ask. By 7 the following evening, Claire stood beneath the vaulted ceiling of the Vampire Council chamber, wondering how her life had traveled from carrying champagne glasses to judging a king in less than 24 hours. The chamber lay beneath Alexander's Westchester estate, hidden behind doors that had opened the moment her glowing wrist approached them. 12 council members sat around a crescent-shaped table of dark oak. Victor Hale occupied the center seat. Jason stood behind him, suddenly looking much less important than he had at the gala. Alexander stood alone before the council. No throne, no guards beside him, no symbols of wealth. Only a black suit, winter-pale skin, and the same steady gray eyes Claire remembered from the rain. Hale rose. Claire Bennett, the Covenant recognizes your bloodline and requires your judgment. Does Alexander Graves remain worthy of the crown? Claire looked at Alexander. Not yet. Murmurs swept through the chamber. Hale smiled. Then you reject him? I said not yet. Claire turned toward Alexander. You promised to answer every question. I did. If keeping your crown required controlling humans, would you do it? No. If protecting vampire law meant treating people like me as lesser, then the law would need to change. And if I reject you tonight? The chamber became silent. Alexander did not glance at the council. Then I stepped down. Hale struck the table with his palm. Centuries of stability, surrendered because a waitress asks you to? Alexander finally looked at him. Her occupation does not reduce the value of her judgment. Claire felt her wrist grow warm. Hale's confidence faltered. She turned toward Jason. Why did you bring him here? Jason looked at Hale before answering. Because he promised me a position. Connections. Money. Claire almost laughed, but there was nothing funny left. So when you mocked my life last night, you already knew who I might be. Jason lowered his eyes. Yes. The answer hurt less than Claire expected. Perhaps because she finally understood that Jason had measured everyone by usefulness, while Alexander, for all his impossible power, had repeatedly given her choices when controlling her would have been easier. Claire faced the council. Yesterday, Alexander lied when he called me his wife. Several council members shifted. He did it because he thought he was protecting me. It was reckless, and I was furious. Alexander accepted the words without protest. But every moment after that, when the truth became inconvenient, he gave me something nobody else in this room offered. Claire paused. Freedom. Golden light spread across the mark on her wrist. The symbols carved into the chamber walls awakened one after another. I confirm Alexander Graves as king. The room filled with warm light. Every council member rose. Even Hale had no choice but to bow his head. Alexander remained still, watching Claire with quiet disbelief. Later, long after the council had departed and Jason had left without another word, Alexander walked Claire through the silent upper halls. You kept your crown, she said. Because you allowed me to. No, because you were willing to lose it. They reached an unfamiliar corridor. Claire's mark suddenly glowed again. At the end stood a narrow door Alexander had never seen open. It unlocked before Claire touched it. Beyond was a forgotten gallery covered in dust. One portrait hung beneath a white cloth. Claire pulled the cloth away. Her breath stopped. A woman in an 1840s dress stared back with Claire's eyes, Claire's fair complexion, even Claire's unmistakable smile. Eleanor Bennett. But Alexander was staring at something else. Painted beside Eleanor stood a pale man wearing a royal crest. His face was identical to Alexander's. Claire slowly turned toward him. You said Eleanor chose you. Alexander's expression went completely still. Beneath the portrait, golden letters began appearing across the frame, words that had been invisible for nearly 200 years. Claire read them aloud. To the king I chose once, and to the Bennett woman who will choose him again.